Hello and welcome to Two Pigs in a Pod, a podcast for the people of Glazing by the people of Glazing. I'm George Lewis, editor at the People in Glazing Society, or more commonly known as PiGs, and I'll be your host. PiGs began in 2004 and has held numerous informal networking events all over the UK and more recently in the USA to bring members of the glazing and fenestration sector together to network, socialise and to be the facilitators to build and cement relationships to push the industry forward to the next level. The glazing sector has an abundance of stories, characters and opinions, and in each episode we'll aim to share some of those stories with people from throughout the whole supply chain and beyond, debating the industry's biggest talking points, while also getting to know them on a more personal level, discussing their careers within glazing and what the future of our sector looks like in their eyes. Our guest today is Simon Jarman. Nice to meet you, Simon, and welcome to the pod.
Hi, George. How you doing?
For those that don't know who you are, can you briefly explain who you are and what you do within our industry?
So, I'm Simon Jarman. I am the owner of Clever Bean Accounting, which is I believe, the only business in accounting that specialises purely in double glazing companies.
Okay. And how it's not always an easy sector to get into. It's not the usual sectors that people. How did you get into glazing in the first place?
Completely by accident. So
you're not the first person that said that.
As I guess, perhaps is true of most people. But no. So I was probably only 27 or something. This was back in 1995, and I was working as an accountant for a greeting card company up north, looking for a job somewhere down London way, and I got approached by a recruiter to go and work for Everest. But the attractive thing at the time was that Everest was owned by a group called Karaoke, which was a FTSE 200 company at the time. So I'd obviously heard of Everest. I'd seen all the Ted Malt ads when I was a kid. So I knew it was a sort of blue chip-ish business. But the real attraction for me actually at the time was the much larger group. And I thought, I'll just go along to Everest for a year or two. And then maybe I'll get to move within the group. Yeah. Didn't quite work out like that.
Okay, what before you started? Obviously, you come from a completely different sector. What did you know about glazing before you started at Everest?
Absolutely nothing. No. So I guess it was still relatively early into my career when I joined the glazing industry. I think next year I'll have been in the industry for 30 years. So I had got quite limited experience when I first joined. Prior to that, I'd worked at a large accounting practice, one of what then was Big Six firms. And then I had a couple of roles in industry, one in a greeting card business, as I mentioned earlier, and also I worked in the steel sector for a while.
And what was the glazing sector like when you first started it? Yeah, we obviously hear stories from the 90s and even back into the 80s with the white gold era. Like, what was your perception of the industry when you first started?
Well, it very different to how it is now. Over the last 30 years, it's certainly evolved a lot. I know that the main difference is, as you say, at the time the market was really booming. It was, I would say, coming towards the end of the white gold era in 1995. But it was still all about PVC. And I guess the sort of sales approach was still a little akin to the white gold portrayal. I think that's changed a lot. I think it's softened considerably and for the better, I might add. So that's one area that's kind of really nice to see how the industry has evolved. I think there's been a kind of a big shift from the sort of power of the nationals to the power of the locals and the regionals, particularly more recently. So again, I feel like that's kind of a good step in the right direction. Back then, the products were very limited. It was kind of PVC or PVC. There were no or very, very limited foils, colours, options. You didn't have things like flush sash. So the range of product that is now available is just completely gone through the roof, as well as the range of materials. And I think maybe the other thing that's really changed is the regulation. When I first started, there was no Part L. So there was no requirement at all for thermal performance. There was no fencer, no surtax. None of that existed. And of course, over the period of time, that whole landscape has just evolved and evolved and evolved and become more and more regimented, and to the point where these days it's an incredibly large part of all of our lives.
And how has your role changed? Obviously, you've worked within the finance mainly roles. Like, how has that changed over the years from when you started to how it is now?
So I guess I've been very fortunate. My career has been quite varied. I started off as an accountant. I then transitioned into being a CEO. And then I've now transitioned back into being an accountant again. But I've worked in large companies, I've worked in small companies, I've worked inside the glazing sector, I've worked outside the glazing sector. So it's been a kind of really varied and interesting career for me. I was at Everest for 16 years, initially as an accountant, and then I ran that business for about 8 years. I left there, and then I did a buy-in in a small energy management business, so nothing to do with glazing whatsoever. Had that business for about 3 years, grew it, sold it. Then I came back into the glazing sector, working for a private equity company that was investing in the space at the time, and I did that for a couple of years. Then I went out of the sector again, and I worked for a graphics business that was supplying the automotive industry, partly in the UK, partly in South Africa, so that was really interesting international experience. And now, here I am with my own business, back in the glazing sector.
Yeah. So like they say, even if you do get out, you always end up back in the glazing sector.
Once it gets its claws into you, that's it. It's like Hotel California.
Yeah. And do you think you say you've worked in the industry, outside of the industry, do you think you've brought bits of how you've worked in other industries into the glazing sector?
Oh, for sure. I think in everything you do, you learn something new every day, and it just becomes a part of your armoury, a part of your kit bag. And business knowledge, business techniques are applicable very generically across many different sectors. Obviously, the glazing industry's got its own nuances, it's got its own specialisms, but a lot of what you would do typically in any business is applicable to this sector as well.
Okay. And you say obviously now you've set up on your own business and your own accounting company. What was the reasoning behind going it alone and not working for big companies and smaller companies? What was the reason to do it by yourself?
So I've worked for big companies, and I've worked for small companies. Before this, the largest company I worked for was turning over at its peak 175 million with 2,000 staff. The smallest was 3 million turnover with 20 staff. But the common theme with all of that was that I was always working for somebody else. And throughout all of that time, I guess I'd always harboured a bit of a desire to be my own lord and master. So I guess the first driver was to be master of my own destiny. But also I think I genuinely felt that I might be able to give something back to help businesses in this sector. I've got quite a lot of knowledge of the window industry itself, and I've got quite a lot of knowledge in business generally, and I felt hopefully I might be able to add a bit of value.
Right. And what are some of the common questions you get? Like, you've worked for big companies, you've worked for small companies. What's the question that keeps cropping up in terms of accounting and what you do that actually doesn't seem to be going away and always gets asked?
So, I mean, in this sector, initially at least, it's not often that I get asked an accounting question. The question that I get asked all the time is, I'm working really, really hard, but I don't seem to be making any money. How do I grow my business? How do I make it more profitable? But that's nearly always the number one question.
And is that an easy question to answer?
Typically, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it normally is, because those business owners don't have a handle on what's going right and what's going wrong in their business. So I'm normally able to help them to see what's good and what's in need of a little bit of a tweak.
Okay. And obviously a lot's changed in terms of how companies look after their finances. Is it a case that every company, big or small, needs some sort of software to manage them, or can they still do stuff manually, or is that just not the case anymore, that they actually, it's much better to have a software to be looking after those kind of things for you?
So for a typical window business, let's take an installer.
Yeah.
I think it's essential to have software. The software provides you with a framework, a blueprint to run your business. And I think there's three pieces of software that a typical installer would need. They need a piece of pricing software at the front end, of which there are numerous on the market. They need a CRM software, and they need a piece of accounting software. And all three of those need to talk to each other. And if you've got the right tech stack across those pieces of software, they'll effectively run your business for you. They give you that structure and process that you need to run a window and door business. If it's a fabricator, then obviously you need additional software for manufacturing, for running your shop floor, and that clearly has to be something that's window industry specific. But again, there's many well-known examples of that.
Okay. And do you think, from going back to the installer, that obviously there's glazing accounting software now or come into the market? Do you think it's important? Can they use a generic one that's used in other industries, or would you say it's probably better to actually use one that's for the glazing industry?
So there's absolutely no need whatsoever to have glazing industry specific software.
Okay.
Generic software is absolutely fine, and I would always recommend to anybody that they use Xero. I try and push all of my clients to use Xero. It's a fantastic piece of software. The art is not in the software itself, it's in how you set it up. You've got to capture the right data, which most of our industry don't, because if you've got the right data at the front end, then you're able to produce the right information at the back end, which will really help the owner understand their business better to make the right decisions off the back of it.
Yeah, and is that something that someone at a company can do without the need of someone like you to come in to help them out? Is it relatively easy in the first instance to set it up, or will they need your help first off?
I'd say it's not easy, because you need the knowledge of what to set up in the first place. The actual process of setting up a chart of accounts in Xero is very straightforward, but knowing what chart of accounts you need, what data needs capturing, how to capture it, how to code all of your costs to the right areas, how to categorise them all, that is something that has come from years of experience. So I would say that, particularly again at the smaller end of the market, you've got owners of businesses that are stretched in every direction. These businesses are all resource light, and the owner has to be the sales director, he has to be the managing director, has to be the operations director, customer service director. You cannot expect someone to have that kind of financial knowledge. So I think they genuinely do need the support of somebody, ideally me, obviously, but of someone who's got that experience, but not just in accountancy, in accountancy and business in general. And I think there's kind of a really important distinction here. There are two types of finance. There's what I call compliance, which is the finance that you have to do by law to stay compliant with HMRC, with Companies House. So that's filing your statutory accounts at the end of the year, your corporation tax returns, your VAT returns, your payroll, complying with CIS, the things that you have to do. Those things add very little value to any business, but they're things that have to be done. The other type of finance is business finance. And this is the finance that gives you the information you need to run your business. Businesses ultimately are run by the numbers, and if you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. And it's critical that you create a budget, you set a roadmap for your business. you create a set of KPIs that allows you to measure that performance, to be able to see what's going right, what's going wrong, and be able to take rapid action to either improve or fix the situation. So business finance is very forward-looking. It's about finding ways constantly to improve the business, whereas compliance is very backward-looking. Now, the problem that I see is that the majority of businesses, small businesses in the window and door sector, use external accountants who are accountants in practice. Those guys don't have any business experience, they don't have any window industry experience. What they know how to do is compliance. They don't know how to do business finance. So what you end up with is a situation where it's just seen as a cost for the business owner because they see no added value but a load of money going out the door. And often the standard of the work that's being done isn't up to scratch, which doesn't help these guys at all. So what I believe is needed is a blend of the two types of finance. Someone who's going to make sure that you do stay on the right side of your legal requirements, but also is going to give you the tools that you need to really help improve and drive and understand your business.
And is that easy to do, to have someone or a company to help you out? Is it? We obviously, at the end of the day, people will think, well, how much does that cost? What is it an expensive thing, but actually the benefits outweigh the cost? Like how does it all work?
Well, it's not expensive at all, obviously. No, I mean, I think it is not a hugely expensive exercise because what we see is a whole bunch of businesses that generally all look very similar to each other. They've got the same problems, they've got the same issues, and they're kind of doing the same things. So our fix is kind of plug and play to an extent, but you have to have the kind of the knowledge in the first place. But what I'll always say to any new client that I take on is kind of whatever it costs, the value that we will add will outweigh it by at least 10 times.
Okay. And going back to the sector in general, or other sectors that you've worked in, is there anything that you think we can bring into this sector that you might have seen elsewhere that actually that could work for us to better the sector as a whole?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, I think as I said earlier, business is kind of generic, and principles can be applied across many different sectors. So I wouldn't say there's kind of one specific thing, but I think just sharing general good business practice across the sector is the most important thing. And what we do see a kind of a big variety of sophistication in terms of business practice. There are some businesses who are exceptionally good in this sector, who have got great structure, great process in place, and there are others that are a little less knowledgeable, a little less sophisticated, and who struggle. And what I'd like to see is a whole bunch more investment, particularly at the installer end, to improve the business knowledge and the sophistication of the installer end of the market. Because I think if our installers can perform better and grow, it's going to trickle all the way up the supply chain. It's going to help the whole market succeed. One thing that worries me is the way that everything is about competing on price. At the installer end of the market, there's very few companies that are really looking to differentiate themselves through excellent service, through great products, and charge a price premium. The majority are just all trying to be cheaper than the next guy.
Race to the bottom mentality.
And that is a recipe for disaster, unfortunately, because all it's going to do is ultimately squeeze everybody's margins. It squeezes everybody's cash flow. And we end up with a situation where numerous businesses go out of the industry every year, and that's a real shame.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mindset that really needs to change. I think we need to see the consumer educated that the product is worth a lot more than we charge the consumer for it, and find a way of getting much better gross margins into this industry and kind of secure the long-term health of it.
And so you say that that's the main, to stop this race to the bottom mentality, is to actually educate the homeowner and actually give them a better understanding of what they're actually buying.
Well, I think you've got to educate the installer to educate the homeowner. Maybe there's some stuff that can be kind of done direct, but ultimately it's the installer that's giving the price, and it's the installer that has to justify that price. And the way they go about that is the most important thing. They've got to understand that what they're offering is a valuable product, and the best way to sell it is not to say it's cheaper than Joe Bloggs down the road.
Yeah. From the conversation you're having with installers, is that doable? Are they happy to know what you're saying and actually take it on board to develop not only themselves but the industry as a whole?
I think honestly it's a big task, because we're not educating a small bunch of people. There's 12,000 installers, I think, in the UK. So it's a big population to try and kind of move the tide on. But you've got to start somewhere, and I think that there are a number of great kind of industry bodies who are in a position to provide that kind of influence, whether it be trade federations, whether it be organisations like PiGs or many others. It's certainly not something that we alone can do as a small accounting practice. It's got to come from some of the bigger players. I also think that the fabricators and the systems houses have a big part to play in it. Ultimately they're the ones that are going to benefit from the installer base growing, and I think more time could be invested by those guys in training, education, and general performance improvement for their own customer base.
Okay. And obviously you had transferable skills, you transferred from outside the sector in. What transferable skills have you seen throughout your career that someone from outside the industry we could actually use in our industry?
Well, I think it kind of comes back to that same question that we talked about earlier, really, where you kind of got these generic business skills that are applicable across multiple sectors. I wouldn't say there's one thing that I've seen in all of the other businesses that I've worked at that is specifically applicable. I mean, I guess one business that I worked in supplied product to Ford and Toyota, and it was supplied to the line. So if it was late, the line stopped, and that meant huge penalties. So you just simply couldn't be late. So in a business like that, there's a degree of system and process that is so rigid that you cannot make a step wrong. Whereas we do see in our supply chain lots of poor on time in full scores, deliveries late, deliveries damaged, that type of thing. I don't think we're as good at our manufacturing and delivery as I have seen in other industries.
Okay. And talking about from your point of view, from an accounting point of view, are those opportunities still there from someone that's maybe worked in a different part of another industry within finance? Can they be transferred into our sector, or would they need different kind of training or qualifications maybe?
So I think that goes back to the earlier question about the type of finance that our industry needs. So you've got businesses up to, let's say, 6 or 7 million turnover. They're almost never going to have in-house finance. They can't justify the cost. And even if they could, they're not going to be able to attract a highly qualified person in, because the role would be too narrow for that highly qualified person. So I think you're only really looking at the larger businesses, the bigger fabricators and systems houses, larger glass processors and that type of thing. And I think there's as good an opportunity in those businesses for someone in finance as there would be in any other sector. I mean, in fact, I think it's a particularly interesting sector for someone in finance because there's so many different facets to it, particularly on the manufacturing side. Glass processing, for instance, you've got to understand all the waste and the yields, optimization, working out your gross margins by product type, understanding stock holding, cash flow forecasting. They're quite complex businesses, and they're quite demanding, and therefore, as an accountant, finance person, you learn quite a lot. But I think it's particularly applicable to the bigger businesses. Your average 5 million and down business is not going to have a finance person.
Okay. And lastly, if someone approached you from outside the industry and said, I want to know a bit more about glazing and potentially get into the glaze, how would you sell it to them?
Well, I've been here 30 years, so there must be something good about it. Although I think the Hotel California story maybe isn't the right one. Mm-hmm. I think it's an incredibly exciting and vibrant industry that's constantly evolving. It has its challenges, but I think being part of the solution to that actually can be quite attractive. And I think if you were to kind of paint the story that we talked about earlier, where over the last 30 years, how much the industry's changed, how much the shape of it has improved, I think just being part of that journey to help keep improving this industry and driving it forwards is an exciting prospect for anybody.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for the answers to those questions. I think that our listeners and our viewers will get a lot out of the accounting side of things, which is not always spoke about in our industry or not on a wide basis. But we'll sort of end that part and go into a bit about you. We want to learn a bit about you as a person, not as an accountant. So I'll fire some quick fire questions at you, and just give me the first answer that comes into your head.
Okay. So
we'll start with, what's your favourite day of the week?
Oh, Monday. Yeah, because it's the start of the week and excited to get going.
No. Do you prefer talking over email or by phone?
Oh, phone, always. It's always better to talk to somebody direct.
What's your favourite thing to do outside of work?
Skiing.
Nice. What's your go-to karaoke song?
We Are the Champions by Queen.
What's your favourite place to visit?
South Africa.
No. And what was the first gig you ever attended, music gig? What was the first one?
U2 at Roundhay Park.
Ah, nice. That's not a bad one. We've had some sketchy first gigs. I think U2, you might just get away.
Do I win that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
What time of day do you feel most in the zone? Are you a morning person or a night owl?
100% morning person. Yeah, I'm hopeless in the evening. Batteries have run flat.
And lastly, just to go back to the industry, in a year's time, if we sat here in a year's time and I asked you how the industry or how you think the industry will be looking, do you think it will be in a better position or a worse position or about the same?
I think it'll be better. I think it gets a little better year in, year out. And from what I've seen, it's been a good start to the year, certainly for my clients. It seems as though there was a lot of pessimism last year. A lot of the leads were down, whereas it's still quite early days, but I think the signs are quite good. I think in the news, there's a lot less about high interest rates, inflation. I think the consumer spending is very much driven by what we see in the media every day, and I think the media has softened, and I'm hoping that means that the consumers are opening up a little bit more, and that's kind of certainly what we've started to see in the first 5 or 6 weeks of this year.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a nice way to end the questions. And just as a last bit of our podcast, we're asking our guests to shout out anyone that they know. It can be from outside the industry, it can be from in the industry, and it can be more than one person if you want. So, if you'd like to send it down to the camera of who you want to shout out.
Well, I guess the obvious shout out is to all my fantastic clients who, without, I wouldn't be here, and it's been an absolute pleasure working with you all over the last year. Well,
thank you very much to Simon for joining us today on Two Pigs in the Pod. Really enjoyed hearing your stories and hearing about the finance side of things. That's it for today, so I hope you can join us on another episode soon. And remember to head to the PiGs website at www.peopleinglazing.co.uk to find out when the next PiGs networking event is, and for all your glazing and fenestration people news. And whilst you're there, you can also sign up to our bi-weekly newsletter, aptly named Stein News, straight to your inbox there as well. Goodbye and see you again soon.